My name is Csaba Szokocs, and I came from Hungary, from Budapest, from a company called Avosoft. It's actually the same as Siemens, maybe you heard about it. We are doing industrial automation for a long time in very, very big projects. Actually it is one of the world's biggest .NET project. And I would like to tell you about our experiences with risk-based testing in our Scrum teams, and especially how we started using it and why we are still doing it after many years. But before that, I would like to ask you a question. Who can ride a bicycle here? Not everyone. Come on. Can't you ride a bicycle? Yes, you can. So I was actually surprised here in Moscow that there are a lot of traffic and there were almost no bikers. But a lot of guys can still. And do you remember it? How you learned it? Can you remember it? Who taught you how to ride a bicycle? Can you remember it? So was it your father? Yes. Or your mother, or maybe your big brother? Yeah, unfortunately, I do not remember it. I can ride a bicycle, but I do not remember it anymore. Somehow it faded away. Maybe I learned it alone, I don't know. I just remember that I had a bike and I'm riding it. But what I do remember exactly, how I taught my daughter how to ride a bicycle. So here they are. I have two daughters. The smaller one learned alone. I didn't help her a lot, but I remember perfectly how I taught my biggest daughter, and she can still ride, as you see. Because it was painful for me. I remember it very good. So she was very, very afraid of it. She was motivated to learn it somehow, but she was very afraid. And I told her that we cannot use the supporting wheels all the time, so you have to learn it somehow to bike it alone. And she said that, Daddy, but please, please, help me, hold me, I do not fall. Promise me. And I said, okay, I promise, I won't let you down. And then we went down. I had to hold the bicycle like this, and running after her for an hour. And after this hour, I could not stand up. I got back pain for a week, and I was very exhausted. But why did I do that? So why was worth it to get some pain and back pain and do all of this? By the way, this is just to imagine that how this worked, what I did for an hour. And of course, this is a stock photo. It's not me, and definitely not my daughter. But imagine what are the other options. So I could have just let her to try it alone and learn it alone. What can happen? What can go wrong? So maybe she falls. Okay, then imagine she's lying on the ground, crying, maybe bleeding, and you run there and calm her down, put some bandage on the bones, but these are reactions. Quite natural reactions, yes, but still reactions. Wouldn't it be better to avoid these problems and have a much bloodless experience? And we did. So she's still motivated for biking because she didn't fall. And she was so motivated, and she remembers also this perfectly because we didn't take a photo back then. But when she saw this stock photo, when I prepared for this presentation, she got very excited and ran away. And come back a few minutes later with a drawing that, Daddy, after this, we draw this together. And this is definitely me and my daughter. So that's why I did it. Because she remained motivated and she didn't have bad experiences with this. And why I told you this story? Because I realized that I saw very similar examples in our Scrum teams. So at the beginning, they were also very motivated, very eager to learn and do stuff with higher velocity and everything that would provide more user stories. But they didn't know exactly how to do this. They were not used to it. And there was no one who was holding their bike. So they can fall and they can bleed then and lose their motivation maybe. Because this is how management imagines this agile transition. Then yes, we get high speed and high velocity and we can even switch the gears and get even more speed and deliver even more. But the teams are not working like this. They have to get used to it, they have to learn it, how to do it, and get to have some velocity at the beginning. And this is one of our team events. These bikes look much more like our Scrum teams. So some are just bumping around and sometimes deliver a lot and then nothing, and then again a lot and then again nothing. Or there are some tricky bikes, also like the Scrum teams. If you try to move them right, they will go left. Or if you try to move them left, they will go right. Or what I'm trying to do, but not with not too much luck, that you have to reverse. You have to go backwards in order to go forward. So each team is different. And there is no team that we can put this together, so we can use the same method. So that's why they need time to adapt to things and learn and improve. And this is when the risk-based testing came handy, because I was working as an architect back then, and I learned about the risk-based testing in tester teams. So how are they using it? And I thought that maybe this would be interesting for us to use it in our Scrum teams in a bit of different way, because in the testers, they are using it for if they have a short time frame for testing and much more tests which needs to be executed, then they do some risk-based analysis to find out which tests have the most value in this short time frame. But we do not have this problem in Scrum teams. We need to test everything in a two weeks period. But we can find out and prioritize problems, risks, to see what tests would have the more value. And I would like to show you how we adapt it, how we use this risk-based testing in our Scrum teams with developers. So what are the problems we faced? This is the usual Scrum process. So anyone who are doing any kind of Agile must saw this picture at least once. So we have a backlog, a sprint backlog, and working in short-term iterations, and then we have a potentially shippable product. But the teams do not know how they can do this. So at the beginning, they fall back to the methods they are used to. So they are doing in the sprint, or before they are doing some grooming, some design, then they implement, and then they test. And usually this testing is at the end of the sprint, after they finished implementation. And the problem with that is the same as with the old methods, with the waterfall. So this looks like a mini waterfall model in the Scrum. And it has the same problems. If we find a serious issue at the end of the sprint, it's usually too late to change correctly or to fix it correctly. And we have to live with the consequences, either with some bugs, what we have, or we have a feature cut, so we have to remove a feature and do not deliver something, or we hack around and fix it somehow and have to live with some technical debts. Neither of this is good. It would be much better to avoid those things, those problems, and how to do that. How cool it would be to find them much earlier, before we include these problems in the coding. We heard already about shift left and shift right, so this is one of the shift left movements, to move the testing as early as possible. And here in the product backlog, when we didn't do anything in the code, and we try to think about testing already, this helps a lot for the developer teams. And this is where risk-based testing helped us. How exactly? I will show you some phases which are relevant for the risk-based testing. So this is not just a normal Scrum process description. These are the phases which have some impact on the testing activities. So first we have some so-called preparation, where a new user story comes in and we find out what we need to do. Then there is a refinement phase, when the team sits together and try to understand the problem and they try to find what will be the solution. Then there is a planning, where they define the tasks which needs to be done, and in the sprint they do it. So these are the phases for a user story lifecycle, where risk-based testing comes handy. Let's see how. So the product owner delivers us a new user story. This is still rough. Maybe it's too big, or it has no acceptance criteria, or not complete. But still, when we understand what is behind, we can start together a risk-based test meeting to collect already the risks which can arise in this story. And we try to answer the question, what can go wrong with this story? So we are not defining test cases, we are trying to find risks, especially for this specific story. This is the most important part of the whole process. So if you are doing only this, then it's already a good start and could be enough. Some teams are doing just this list of risks and nothing more. So I will go into a lot more details of this, because this risk-based test meeting is not something yet you can say that yet another meeting. We have a lot already. You can actually combine with grooming meetings, or you can make it short. Normally we do 10-15 minutes for a user story if we are used to it. So not too much, and not with the whole team. Just a few people sit together. I will talk about that. So let's see an example. As I said, we are doing some industrial automation software. This is PowerPoint, not our software, and we had to rewrite some parts of it. It's a designer tool where you can do some shapes and elements and resize them and just normal things. And I couldn't bring you screenshots from them. It's not so exciting, but it's the same like here in PowerPoint. So we can have some shapes and do a lot of stuff with it. And we had a new story that such shapes needs to be aligned somewhere on the screen. So left or right or up. It looks a very simple story, right? So we also said that, does it make sense to do a risk-based testing for this? It's so simple, we align to the top and it's on the top, and that's all. But we had bad experiences with this if we skipped this meeting, so we sit together with 2 developers and 1 tester and think about it and just stay there. So what can go wrong with this? Let's say that we align to the top. What can go wrong? Maybe nothing. And then the developer said that, okay, but what if we have 2 objects, 2 squares? So then it's still not complicated. Then both of these are aligned to the top. But then the tester came that, yeah, but shouldn't they keep their relative position? No, because that happens only when they are grouped together. If they are not grouped, both of them goes to the top. Okay, we wrote it in the acceptance criteria. Okay. Then we sit together. What can go wrong? Anything else? Do you have an idea? Then the tester came. What if these squares are rotated and we align to the top? Okay, that's still not complicated. They are aligned both in the topmost position. But then the architect said that, yeah, this won't be easy to solve because then we need to share with the information with some other component, and because we store the coordinates differently and so on and so on, it turned out it changes the implementation. So it was quite important to clarify this. And then we had a very, very interesting question. What happens if we have a circle and it is rotated and we align it to the top? How it should work? And we were there, does it make even sense to rotate a circle? Why we should do that? And we talked that yes, in the industry maybe someone is simulating some gears or something and rotating automatically, so yes, maybe it makes sense. But if we rotate a circle, it's the same circle, so if we align to the top, it should be the same. And actually, we were not sure, so there were two options. So then it's rotated circle, it's either aligned to the top or we have some gap here. What do you think? Which is correct? Who votes for 1? And who votes for 2? Yeah, it's a tricky one. And if I show you the selection box, then it makes sense. Because it is aligned using the selection box. And that was the point when I realized that it makes sense even for such simple stories to think about it and think about what can go wrong with this story, because we can have some surprises later. And we prepared for this, and what was really interesting, that we made some automated testing for this stupid circle, and not with just happy scenarios with some rectangle. So we had a much better test where we could test some risky scenarios. So this, very interesting, it's that I used this photo also before in other presentations, but as I saw some dash cams in Russia, that you can actually encounter such situations here. So what tips I can give you from my experience for this risk-based test meeting if you try to do this in the developer teams? So first, focus on the user story. Do not try to solve everything. So we do this risk-based test list for each user story separately. Maybe sometimes when they belong together or they were split, then we also combine this list, but normally we do it separately for each user story. This also means that the risks are valid in this user story only. And that's why this technique is not the same like the FMEA or TRA and other stuff some teams are doing, because they are done in much bigger scope. We are narrowing the scope to the specific user story which comes in the next sprint or one of the following sprints. And another tip, that try to collect risks and not test cases. This can be hard at the beginning, but later we can get used to it if we try to answer the question, what can go wrong? What we had very, very useful is that we can invite experts to this meeting. And here I mean testers, for example. So in our company, we had a separate testing department. So I don't know how many of you are working in a Scrum team, inside a Scrum team with developers. And how many of you are separated from development? Yes, so there are both scenarios. So we had this tester separated from our team, and it was very hard because they wanted the specification before we start the implementation, but then they get 2 or 3 weeks later, and then we get back the bugs after when we're already working on different stories, and this makes things more complicated always, both for the development and both for the testers. And this was a very good opportunity to bring the testers in, and they could have an influence on the story before we even started it. And they could tell us what they would test later on this story, and we could prepare for it. Also, it was possible to invite other teams when we had dependency to other components or other teams or other architects maybe. So there is a good opportunity to invite some other people and talk with them. And another thing, that participation should be optional. Whenever we tried to force this, it didn't work anymore. So we just leave it out that those people who are interested in this meeting and want to think about it, they can come. And whoever is not interested, it's better that they stay at their place and work something. It's also good for the newcomers because they will see how the software is working in different scenarios, in tricky scenarios, because we try out things usually. Another tips for collecting risks, when you try to focus on what can go wrong, that you try to collect risk from different areas, not only just from the software or from the user story, so how it can go wrong, but also from different aspects. But first, try to imagine how this feature will work in the production. Of course, it doesn't exist yet, but you can imagine that how it will work if it would be ready. We still do not have a solution concept maybe, so there are different alternatives. We can think about all of this. How can be used or misused? We can think about this. Then upgrade scenarios, migration of data, we can go to other direction. I think you know much better than me which scenarios can be considered during testing. So this CRUD, this create, read, update, delete scenarios, can they go wrong somehow with the data? Try to working besides limits in stress scenarios, how it behaves. Yeah, NFRs, so not just features, but non-functional requirements. Just some examples that can the security go wrong or usability or performance or something. Then check features in combination. This is very helpful if you try to combine the features like we did with the rotation. The rotation is a completely different feature, but if you combine with this, then maybe it has a different working model, or try to copy paste it, how it behaves afterwards. So try to combine this, but still focusing on this user story. Then consider what side effects could have. Maybe here the experience comes handy. So if you saw a lot of side effects already, or so have some experience with the bugs which you got previously, then someone, maybe a tester or an experienced developer, can have very, very good insights on this. So let's get back to our process. Because with this meeting, we can collect the basic risks. And as I said, this is already very, very helpful for the team, because if we find out a problem and we spot a headlight on it, then like the bugs under a stone, they will run away. So they won't include this bug in the code anymore. But still, it makes sense to do this forward and use some other things, like in the grooming meeting, when the team sits together and tries to find the solution, how will they do this, and try to estimate this story. Then someone can prepare or write in this meeting, they can prioritize this risk. This is not just normal risk handling techniques, so we try to find the probability and the damage, if it happens, what kind of damage it causes, and the test effectiveness. This might be new. So how easy is to test out this risk? Is it easy, or is it completely impossible to test out? If it's impossible or very hard, then maybe we should find another measures. We should fix it somehow differently. And also, this is also only focus on one specific user story. So it doesn't make sense to compare the numbers given here with another table. And with this, we have an extended prioritized list. I will show you one later. And with this list, we can go to the planning meetings where we see which risks have the biggest impact on the story and which risks are the most easier to test. And if we have some risks which are very high, which has high impact, and also easier to test, we also have a test strategy. Which test should we start? And also we can focus on critical parts of the software and not just the happy path. This is where the developers very usually fall in, that they are focusing on the story, what is described in the user story with the acceptance criteria, and they do not think too much about these critical scenarios. This is where you as testers can help them and influence the story and bring to attention those really critical parts. And then we have a test strategy, we can define test cases, and still before the implementation. And then we can test and develop maybe in test-driven development or any method you like, and then we have a successful demo. So this is how our risk-based testing fits in our process. But as you see, it's not rocket science, so you can put it into almost any process, I believe. If you have questions to this, you can ask now on Slido. And I will go into an example, show you something for prioritization. This is more artificial example, but just to show you something. Let's imagine we need to implement the split screen in Android. So we have two applications at the same time. I know it's already working on some versions, but let's imagine we need to do this. So let's collect some risks. What can go wrong with this? Do you have maybe some ideas? If we rotate the device, then it can go wrong, yeah. Yeah, maybe they will go together, or yeah, it's a bit hard to collect now the answers. So I just show you the risk I've collected on a workshop. So these are also not my ideas, also coming from different testers, and I'm only showing 5 of them just to show how to prioritize it. So let's see, the back button maybe closes the wrong application. That could happen. Yeah. The keyboard is active in a wrong application. So if the keyboard pops up and 2 fields are active in both applications, it's a bit dangerous, yeah. Then zooming with 2 fingers can go wrong. So especially if I'm overlapping the other application, so what happens? Or sound get mixed. If both applications have sound, maybe it goes wrong somehow. Or the battery goes dead too quickly. So there are a lot more, of course, and this story is too big, of course, but this is just for example. And we are doing the prioritization actually very quickly, so we are doing maybe instantly, and just to not give for each risk the same number, we try to find out the lowest and the highest number first, and then we put relatively all others in between. So we use from number 1 to 5, but you can use other ranges or colors or whatever you want. Here, for example, the sound get mixed. This is already can happen. It has not too much probability, so we give 1 to this. But with the zooming, we probably will have problems, so we give a 5, and all others in between. The same for the damage. So if the sound gets mixed, maybe we get some noise, but nothing bad happens. But if the keyboard is active in the wrong application, if I type my password in a Facebook chat or somewhere, then this can be actually quite wrong. So we give a 5 for this. And the others are in between. And then we have an exposure. Already, when we multiply these 2 numbers, as I said, it's not rocket science. So then we can see which risk has the highest impact, and it's the battery goes dead. So it already has a probability, because if 2 applications are active, it maybe is draining the battery more quickly, and the damage is also bad because I cannot use my phone as long as I want. And then we do the same for test effectiveness. How to test the battery stuff? Can we write an automated regression test, how the battery goes dead? I doubt it. So it's very, very hard to test. Maybe we need manual testing for this. But the keyboard is active, is very easy to test. We can simulate this scenario and test it out easily, maybe automated also. And the others in between, and then we get a test priority. So for the risks, what are the most easier to test and with the highest impact is this one, and what are those risks which has a high impact but they are hard to test. So this is already helpful to see how we should start with the testing in the developer team. So before we end, I would like to point out also some dangers of this risk-based testing, because we are using it for years now, and I saw that we can also misuse this one. So first we could have a false sense of security, that we did everything what we could, but it's still not guaranteed that we find everything. So if we sit together for 15 minutes, we do not find every problems for sure. So we can improve our processes, but we still have to consider that there might be side effects, there might be bugs still in there, which we didn't find. So we improved with the bug numbers, but we still get some bugs afterwards. So the testing at the end, the shift right movement is still valid, is needed. It takes sometimes too much time. So especially for bigger stories or for complicated stories, it takes much more time to understand it, to think about it, or even more people are there, but it's still beneficial. So the teams sometimes do not have time, or they do not have time to do this risk-based testing for every story, but at this point they usually do it afterwards. So they still try to collect those risks, maybe a bit later, not before they do something, but they still find it beneficial for them. But that could be a risk. So if you have too many meetings already, then yet another meeting is hard to introduce, and you can think about to reduce the number of participants or include it in the grooming meeting and combine them. Another danger is that it shifts the responsibility to those experts we invited. So if something goes wrong, then they can say that, yeah, the tester said that this will be no problem, or this has low probability, and it still happened. So the responsibility is still for the Scrum team. And we are inviting for help. We get help from experts, and then not that they are responsible for it. And we can overdo, yeah. We can take too much risk, we can list a lot of risk. When the team gets used to it, they sometimes collect too much, and then we think about some very, 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 very special cases. What happens if we copy from another applications and change it and paste it, and yeah, sometimes it's too much. So we have to find a limit where we need to stop. And what are the benefits of the risk-based testing? Is much more easier to collect. It's simple, as you saw. It's test-driven, so we do the testing before the implementation, and it's not as hard as the test-driven development. That is very hard to do if you are not used to it. We will have more value in test because we will test those parts of the system which has the highest impact. It boosts the motivation, both the developers and the testers, because they can have an influence on the story. And as a tester, you can change the way how it will be implemented. So this can be actually very, very motivational for the teams or for the persons. And we can avoid the side effects because we think about it, how we consider it during this meeting. So there are a lot of values. And as you see that my daughter was able to learn how to ride alone without my help. I was sitting back there with back pain, but it was worth. And you as a tester, you can be, like me, the supporting tool or person for the Scrum teams, for the developers, to help them not fall and not bleed and not lose their motivation. And you can use risk-based testing for that. And yeah, what can go wrong? Try it out. Thank you. And now it's time for questions. What risk do you think about? Business risk, product risk, development risk, or a combination of them? Yeah, that's a good question, because we do not think about project risk, for example, that someone gets sick and or will leave the team or something like that. We are thinking about the risks of the user story. So product, oops. Yeah, it was there. Okay. So product risks are actually correct. So we are trying actual product risks. So what from the user story perspective, but not from financial values, for example. And development risk, of course. So architects, developer teams are there, and it's a low-level collecting of risk, not just for the high level. There are other project management methods for that. And business risk, not so much, not too much. It's just too low level for this. Have you ever tried SAFE? It takes risk into account as well. Yes, we are using some kind of SAFE and less combination. It's as always, Siemens uses its own processes like many other big companies. And we also have a lot of risk handling others, this FMEA, this failure mode effect analysis, but this is in a much bigger scope, and we are doing this in each 3 months or something. And also TRA and the management does a lot of other risk handling methods. This is for developers, as I said. So this is not part of the SAFE framework in any way. What risk do you think? I have a lot of features in Milestone. Does it useful to spend a lot of time for risk investigation of all of them? No. So do not spend too much time on it. As I said, that sometimes we are investing 10 minutes for a story or 15 minutes, not more. So we are sitting together with some people. It must be a tester in there, so we always invite a tester as well. But spending too much time is also a risk in itself. It doesn't worth it to spend any more hours for this. But to invest this short time, it has a huge impact. That was already what, yeah. Move testing to backlog. Wow, with minimal priority, I suppose. I do not understand this. It's not in the backlog. So it's part of each story. But I think we can clarify this afterwards. So anyone who has these questions, just come to me, because I'm not sure if I understand it. How do you treat the results of table calculation? It's just a simple Excel table. We put it somewhere, and that's all. So we are doing this for the planning, to help the planning, and not to do some analysis afterwards. So maybe we are extending the risk at the different meetings. If we find something new in the grooming, we're extending it. But afterwards, everything goes according to normal Scrum process, and we just put this table somewhere. It's not used after the story is complete. What kind of stories you measure risks for? Almost every user story. We had problems with such technical stories, so the teams have some technical improvements or pure technical stories to refactor something, and we found that it's much harder to use this risk-based testing for them. It's much easier for the normal user stories where we have some real result. So, but for this normal user stories, we use it almost every time. So that's all. Thank you very much. Have a nice conference. Enjoy.